Hello, everybody. What's on the Elephant and Castle Facebook page? I think we're live. It does say live, doesn't it, Mel?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. With us today is the brand and marketing director from Hutch Gaming, and an old buddy of mine, Guy Pearce. Guy, thank you so much for joining us today. We were just talking a little bit before. I think this is going to be one of those times always, like 45 minutes to cram everything in is not going to be enough. But how you doing, first of all, buddy?
Really good, thanks, Nick. Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen you, but you know, it's always a good connection, I think.
Yeah, it has been a little while. And meet Melissa. Melissa's from the other half of Retribe.
Yes, we chatted quickly. Hi, everyone.
The reason why I'm just kind of making sure all the links get shared. This beginning bit is always quite awkward because I have to do all of this tech stuff, which Guy, you'd probably be better at doing than me. But Guy, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about what you do, so that we can kind of go into branding and marketing and the gaming industry and how the gaming industry has changed over the last 10 months since people have really tried to find different dynamic things to do at home. But I'd like kind of your insight on how the gaming industry has changed, but also your specific job with brand and marketing and how that's changed as well. And then something that kind of just came out of it was this idea of mental health in gaming, and I know it's something that you guys have kind of your finger on the pulse of as well. So can you kind of give people just a rundown of who you are and what you do?
Sure, yeah. So brand marketing director at Hutch, but I've been in video games for a long time. I got into it from college. I was just doing work experience at Sega, and I turned it into like a player support role because I was crazy about games in the late 80s, and I got into games in about 91, 92. So it was the Sega Mega Drive, kind of Sonic 2, all that kind of era. But working in player support, I used to write a lot of tips guides to help people that were stuck on games. So I used to man a phone line. People would call me up. There were no computers, no internet. People would call me up and tell me they were stuck on a game, and I'd try and talk them through where they were stuck. So I've got this intimacy with the players, and I've had this intimacy with the products. So when they were looking to build a PR team to talk to the specialist games media, me and this other guy, Mark, my buddy in player support, we were given this job, and we didn't really know what PR was, but we knew games, so we just started talking about games to the media, and it did really well for us. I moved into Sony and did the similar kind of job for PlayStation, the first PlayStation for the first 5 years, and I started to move into lifestyle press, and I was a more senior guy there, so I started to get the product from Japan, these games that were developed in Japan, and they would say, Guy, just get these games out, in the European market and get some press for them. But they were always like crazy and very Japanese and didn't really fit with what the UK consumers wanted. Some of them worked, but a lot of them didn't. So it made me a little bit frustrated. I was like, if only I could just have got closer to the developers at this precise moment, I could have helped them to shape this thing to be better, and more relevant for this audience. And it would have been a better commercial opportunity for the company. So I went on a bit of a mission from there, which was, moving out of PR. I went off around the world, went to work in Australia, Singapore, and in those roles, I was trying to get closer to the creative source of games. And I was kind of labeled a brand manager. I didn't really know what that was, but they were like, oh, you'd fit this role by the sounds of what you do. But I was always on this mission, get close to the creators and help them make games that are more relevant. And it all kind of came together probably when I met you, Nick, in about 2005, 2007, when I got this job at Codemasters with a racing studio. And they were a very talented racing studio. They made brilliant racing games, but they made them for themselves, and they made them for the UK market or the European market, but nothing in US. And if you ignore US, you ignore, more than 50% of your market opportunity in games. So I worked with them on this process called segmentation, which is where you kind of interview all of the players in the category space. And then you divide them into groups, and you understand from them, like you focus group them, you survey them, but you understand the nuance of their behaviors and their needs. And you can then understand like where your games sit and where you want them to move to, where you might be loved by more players. And that was really successful for those games like Grid and Dirt. You did some work with us on Dirt, you remember, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And that kind of, it was an old kind of electronic arts model of branding. And I thought it was, I was taught that by someone who's very clever, who'd worked at EA, a guy with a sort of, an academic with a PhD in marketing strategy. I didn't have any of that kind of stuff. But it sort of gave me some theory that I then was able to test in different companies. Games back then, still at that time were very much a kind of physical product in a box that you kind of, you built it for 24 months, you launched it, and then you just sat back and you had to wait for about a year, get all the research in, and then start building the next version of it. But games have changed in the last 10 years to be a service model. So, PC games always had that kind of service model with MMORPG, with World of Warcraft, these kind of games. So I started to work more in games as service. I worked up in Cambridge for a company called Jagex on a game called RuneScape, which was a big brand, but I was trying to help shape what that meant and help them understand what players wanted from it and how they could make it grow. And then the last couple of years I've been in mobile, like 100% with Hutch, and they're in the racing category, which helps me because I think a lot of the racing players that I was learning and talking to and shaping product for in the era when we were working together, 2005, they've all sort of aged and they're all kind of playing racing games on mobile now. So they're my guys, and I'm sort of trying to help Hutch to take new directions with those players.
I'm really interested from the time that we met. We did a couple of in real life videos for you to promote, like Colin McRae, Dirt 2. I think Flashpoint Red River, we did something for you as well, which was like probably about 10 or 11 years ago. And you were trying something a little bit different, using in real life video games and real life footage intermixed with some video game footage. And I know it was a bit of an experiment, but I'm kind of interested to know, like you said, things have changed over the last 10 years. What's the real kind of, touch points on marketing and how it's changed with regards to your materials and like you say, like if you ignore the US, but it's peril for you, but also the US market in terms of marketing branding is a lot different than EMEA. So, what are kind of the things that you've seen change? What are the trends in brands and how they've gone and how games have been able to market themselves, with the advent of mobile?
The brand planning and brand building process is not changed dramatically, not as much certainly as like digital marketing and what they call in mobile user acquisition. So it's like fine-tuning ads and running them on Google and Facebook in order to kind of create a click, that you tune the right type of creative. So it's become quite an analytical process in terms of digital marketing and what they call performance marketing. But the brand building process hasn't changed dramatically. The games as a service model means that you're always thinking about your brand and your pillars, and you're always in workshops with development teams, trying to think about like, if we want to mean something to these players over here, what do we have to change about our game, our roadmap of how we're updating it and how we're improving it in terms of the feature set, and then how we're going to enable growth from it. So you're always in this cycle rather than it used to be, like I said, that kind of 24-month development process, and then a sort of once it's in a box, you can't do much with it. But the games as a service model, you can always be tweaking it and you can always be changing elements of it. A lot of the work I do is with platform holders, like Google and Apple. We talk to them regularly. We need them as good partners. We're interested in our app store presence. The imagery that we put on there can all change different elements of how it performs, in terms of a funnel into your game. So yeah, marketing's got more, definitely since 1992. It's expanded quite a lot. There's loads more tools in the box that you can use, but I always think I'm a bit of a Swiss Army knife for marketing and communications in games. I've kind of done everything in it, but I always come at it from a player perspective. I think just from that early stage stuff that I did with in player support, I'm always thinking about the players. I'm always interested in how do we get more of them to love this thing that these developers, you know, put their heart and soul into. So that's the important thing for me. Is like the worst thing is a game that just doesn't get noticed, you know, because you sat with the development team and you've seen them, you know, put a lot of love into it, and then it just doesn't land for some reason. So that's always the worst thing. Sometimes you can divide a community or divide a player base, and like some of them love it and the others hate it, and you get this kind of Marmite effect. But you know, at least they're getting noticed, you know, and at least there's sort of, you know, they're getting some headlines. So that's the kind of key thing. So the Swiss Army knife, you know, I kind of go in and I look at what's going on, and I think, okay, you know, there's many ways that you can market a product. There's no sort of single rule book. There's loads of different plays you can make. So the fun process is just trying different things and seeing what works, and, you know, always being progressive.
When you were talking, I had this memory of when you mentioned your first job as like the go-to person for the problems that players were experiencing. I remember being a kid, and like all the young siblings were around my oldest sister, and we were encouraging her, cheering her on when she was playing like Nintendo Super Mario Brothers and getting to like the next level. And it was like this thing that we all did, and like my sister was a champion, and our whole happiness laid on that moment. And then in terms of like punishment, if we were like being naughty, then my mom would hide the Nintendo and the console, and like we would have to go find, like she didn't hide it very well, we would find it and be back real quick. So anyway, when you were talking about that, all these memories came back around this like unity and this like I don't want to say community because I feel like I'm projecting a bit, but like it was this thing that was so real to us. And then so to hear you speak, and also the evolution of from like, this was in the 80s we were doing this, and to now like gaming is so different, and the interaction is so different because now we're connected to people across the world, and we're in this kind of like own world that we're creating. So I don't know, I'm just rambling, but do you miss anything? Like you've been to the, is there parts of like in the 80s in your like relationship with gaming or your work in it? Is there anything you're kind of like missing about, or are you like good with how it's kind of evolved?
I think it's evolved in a really interesting way. You know, all the things that you talk about there are, you know, mean the same to me. You know, that kind of that collaboration, that sort of, you know, that it used to be 4 people on a sofa playing like GoldenEye or something, or Mario Kart, and now those people are just online and connected in different ways. You know, I guess like some of my friends at my, you know, at my age level that have kids that are same age as my kids, which is like 16 and 15, you know, that they're always worried about the amount of time that their kids spend playing games. They're always like, how can I, you know, control their game time? And they start blaming, you know, they don't want to do it themselves because they don't want the fight. So they start to blame kind of game companies, and they're looking for someone to point the finger at, you know, you're corrupting my children. But then I see them, you know, they'll then go on a, you know, certainly in the last year or so, they'll go and have like Zoom drinks or something like that, and they'll be kind of hanging out on, you know, on Zoom, you know, and hanging out with their friends. And I just say to them, like, your kids are doing exactly what you're doing. You know, the game is not a thing with a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, you've got to get to the level 20, and that's it. And then you get a kind of bunch of flowers. It's changed, and it's a social platform now that they interact with each other in groups, and they extend all of these networks of friendship through games. And, you know, it's a social network with a game attached to it a lot of the time. So things like Minecraft, you know, my kids will get together, you know, with their 2 friends that are in Germany at the moment, but they've known them since primary school, and they'll get together on a Saturday afternoon and they'll just hang out in Minecraft. And that's just about a social platform with a game element to it, because gaming is their most, you know, is the platform that it's taken over everything in terms of music and you know, TV, film. You know, it's the modern version of how we used to sit around watching TV when we were kids. So those things have changed. You were talking about immersion, you know, and detailed graphics and things like, you know, they're much richer worlds now, and there's much more money spent on them to develop them, and they can look more realistic. But more often than not, the games that kind of take off are the ones that don't have that. You know, they can be the ones that have very simple, you know, that have like childlike graphics, and leave more to the imagination. So it hasn't gone off in this big arms race about graphical fidelity and, you know, lifelike graphics. It can often still be this sort of simplistic version of the world that they want to immerse themselves in. Like escapism is a big thing for games. It always was. You know, back in the PlayStation days, we did this campaign called Double Life, and it was a TV ad that was like 60 seconds, but it was all about these different people and how the games gives them a double life. You know, and it was about during the day they ride the bus with the oi polloi, but at night they're a warrior, you know, and they can take on armies and conquer worlds and all those kind of things. I think that was probably you know, working at the company at that time, we really felt like that ad kind of captured something about games, which was that, you know, you can be a hero, and you can escape from, you know, the monotony sometimes of life. You can escape into these worlds and have this different experience that is sort of freeing. I think it can get unhealthy where you don't spend enough time in the real world, you know, and managing that part of your life. So like anything, you need to have a balance, you know, and you need to have self-discipline. And it's not up to games companies, in my mind, to be teaching, you know, to be parenting kids and teaching them about self-discipline. You know, that's not where we should be working. You know, we should be creating rich worlds and immersive things that are alternatives for kids to get involved in, or adults in that, you know, in that sense as well. But, you know, good parenting has to go in hand with good development teams.
I'm really interested to know this though, a bit with the lockdown that's happened, and the fact. Okay, so my partner has 3 boys, and the oldest is 11, and he's into Fortnite. And I've watched him play Fortnite, and I've watched him talk to his friends around, you know, around different places. And there's definitely a connection in a community there. And, you know, he spends so much time there, but also because he can't go outside and see with his friends in the real world because of COVID, there is this thing of is there a responsibility somewhere? I know it comes with parents, but also in the gaming industry, to make sure that, COVID aside, there is some aspect of making sure that kids do have human contact. And obviously now, because we haven't, you know, kids have been able to excel in the kind of virtual world, you know, through Fortnite and Minecraft, you know, to at least still have some connection. But with you know, as a father of a couple of kids, like, how do you make sure that you're, you know, again, COVID aside, your kids can play with mud outside, you know, and touch the bark on a tree, and you know, play with a worm and stuff, all the things that we did when we were kids that we know now, we're like, I really want my kids to be able to do that. But then also, you know, London itself is a pretty unsafe place, and you want to make sure your kids are interacting safe, you know. So there's all of this stuff to weigh up, and I'm just interested to know from a game developer's point of view, are you conscious of that, of making sure that children do have human contact?
I don't know whether we sit around as developers thinking about how we work, you know, to help that. That doesn't really seem to be on our list of objectives. There are things that are happening at a platform level. So Apple are trying to, you know, make it more understood how much time you spend on your device, on different apps. So there's some things that are going on at platform level in that sense to help manage that. But the thing that Melissa touched on earlier about, you know, her mum used to take away the console and kind of hide it in the cupboard. You know, that's how I've been with my kids, is that, you know, they love games, but you know, you have to help them with balance, and you have to try to encourage them to do other things. So I don't buy a lot of games for my kids. You know, if they want it for their birthday, then, you know, I'll get it for them. But a lot of the time I'm buying them other things. You know, I'm trying to give them different experiences. So I want to take them, you know, out on a kayak, or my son loves skateboarding the way that I did when I was young. So there's skate park down the street, and, you know, he can't wait to get back there as soon as it's not got a fence around it and it stops snowing. So there's other things that I think, you know, that the parents can do in order to understand the power of games, and then use it as a bargaining tool in order to get stuff done. You know, there's ways that we can encourage
sanctions.
Yeah.
I have to say that When I was in Toronto, over, I guess, last year at this point, when I was from the pandemic, I had to go back to Canada. I was living with my sister and my niece and my brother-in-law. My niece was 3 at the time, and we still had our like 80 like Nintendo, so I was playing. And my niece was like, and I'm very like mindful in terms of how I want to raise this creature in my life. And I'm like the one of compassion, of cool, own your, you can be sad, you can, all your feelings are your own. And then this little kid who I love more than anything tried to take this controller out of my hands when I was like at level 8, when I like done 3 hours nonstop, and she just pushed end, power off. And I saw red. Everything is just out. Like she's like probably the thing I love the most in the world, one of the things. And I just I had no understanding. I just threw it all away. So that's just a story. But also along with that, I found it really interesting that the last time I played was like properly like Super Mario, the Nintendo, was like in the 80s. So a long time ago. And then we have what, 30 something years after. I like knew everything to do. It was like this muscle memory, this body memory that was so amazing. And like to play it with my sister too. And she's like, no, do that. Like, so there is this like beautiful, I think it can be like this really beautiful experience that can be shared, especially now with this pandemic and COVID. And we have to be really creative in ways we can connect and remember and like have fun almost. So I think there's like such this like way we can be engaged differently, but also like Nick, I think what you were asking was like it's just the balance of like responsibility, and does it come to the developers to be responsible? Not really. I remember in university having to do all this stuff around like violence and video games and all this stuff, and like I always remember thinking, well, I have to watch the news as part of my media literacy studies and communication. Like the news is a lot more violent than some of the things, and so why is one considered more acceptable in terms of the violence we're witnessing and taking in than the other? So I don't have a question. I was just talking about my niece.
That's good. It's interesting topics. It's I think I've experienced games being this kind of folk devil that that people politicians use to sort of to gain popularity at certain times and say they're going to take on the big game companies. Vote for me. But in reality, all they're really trying to take on is like substandard parenting, or but it's a harder thing to talk about. It's a hard thing to point at parents and say, it's not up to games companies to stop their 8-year-old from playing games for 12 hours. Like that's your role. You have kids, you have a responsibility to try to shape their characters, and we all have the same traits. We all have like these, games are great for everybody. That's evident. Like everybody could really kind of get into games and spend a kind of unhealthy amount of time on them. But sometimes we have different levels of framework around us that can encourage different behaviors and balance.
Yeah, and also the social, sorry, Nick, the social constructs too. Like it's easier for us to blame the external thing, one of the external things, other than looking off, like if you're a single parent and you're working 3 jobs, then you don't have time to actually sit with your child or parent them in a way that you would want to. So it is easier for people in power who make the laws and the rules and the moral police to say, well, it's the game's fault, not that the fact that they're getting minimum wage or below minimum. This is just my political rant. I've had a lot of coffee this morning and these kind of excitement, but it is the idea of like, there's all these different factors in place, and somehow in our human brains, we just want to make one thing the reason for all the problems without looking at all the other factors and players in the game. But again, like in the world of politics and governing, it's not, you'll lose because there's so much social, political, like unrest and injustice happening. Anyway,
it was probably, for Nick and I are probably the same kind of age. It's probably TV when we were young. TV was on the front page of the newspapers. This X-rated movie, you know, was going to disturb these people. Think films were banned, you know, quite regularly. Stuff like, you know, the violence in Clockwork Orange. You know, that was the thing. It was the banned films, and it was the movie producers that were evil. And you know, all that's happened is game developers have kind of taken on, you know, that new position of someone to throw sharp instruments at and blame for, you know, the ills of society. But you know, I think games are art. You know, there's some beautiful creative people that are making them. I've worked with developers for nearly 30 years, and I've never met any that had any kind of you know, intention to mislead children and, you know, start a revolution with, like, you know, with angry children. So you know, they just want to make stuff that's cool and relevant, and, you know, have people see what they do and love what they do. And that's, you know, there's a bunch of people with good intentions. I can't speak for 100% of them, but the ones that I've met, certainly in different countries, you know, they're good people, and they get, I think they do get disappointed when these things come up, but you know, we've learned to have a thick skin about it and recognize that, you know, we just keep going and just keep making good stuff. There's a lot of games recently as well that have sort of got involved in, you know, making a positive impact, you know, being representative of different, you know, different groups that hadn't been represented before in games. So that there's some good movements in there as well now. There's a great sort of cultural drive to be representative in the creative side of games, which I think is a positive thing. You know, we as an organization, we hire a lot of people that, you know, that maybe they spend a lot of time working. We all do, you know, maybe too much. Even within, you know, our standard 8 hours a day, it's probably, the balance isn't quite right 5 days a week. I'm sure that will change in years to come, but you know, I was aware that they wanted to be doing better things. They were more altruistic, you know, they wanted to fundraise and things like this, but maybe didn't have the time. So we put in a program where they're given like days to go and do their own choice of charity work, or we've started, you know, like an eco drive to become, you know, carbon neutral as an organization. And we also are doing a lot of mental health, like training internally, and also looking then to extend that to our players, which I think be really positive, sort of scaled exercise. So there's a lot now that you can do within games, you know, that's also good for you in terms of the activities and, you know, helping people in general. There's a company called Special Effect that they make like controllers and interfaces for games that are for people that have really severe physical disabilities, to enable them to have that escapism, you know, and have that kind of, I can still be this, like, you know, fully functioning character in a game. And we, you know, all of the games industry supports Special Effects. Like, they are the most loved charity that exists, you know. I think, like, we have this thing called One Special Day that they organise in September, where we all go and do activities and we all fundraise. And a lot of the studios give their entire day's revenue, which can be like a few $100,000, like, to this company on this one special day. But they also, a lot of things, they bring the industry together. You know, it's a great sort of modern approach, I think, the games industry to current scenarios that we're in.
I really like the, you know, that you guys are addressing, you know, mental well-being for your 100 and odd so people at Hutch, but also for the gaming industry itself. And I'm really interested to know how that came around, because obviously, like, what we've talked about is youth, you know, and getting enough time and balance and good parenting. But what about, you know, older people who, you know, like, we always think about the shut-ins who are, you know, the gaming is their whole life, and addictions with gaming. I know that, you know, as someone in recovery myself with something else, like, I've met a lot of people who have had issues with addictions over gaming and dopamine hits. And so is this something that came onto your radar, is just the acknowledgement of with regards to gaming addiction and mental health? And, you know, do you think maybe let's look after ourselves first before we start looking after others? Because again, you know, I remember, you know, visiting one of your, you know, Codemasters and thinking about these guys sitting behind his desk dialing in, and coding all day, and how that can be really restraining for your growth in the workplace too, because you're not interacting with people. So it's just even the dynamics of being a game developer. So how's that kind of come around? And I know what you've kind of briefly said what you guys are doing, but what are your goals, I suppose, for just addressing mental well-being in the gaming industry?
Yeah, I think we're at an early stage in that, and we're looking at our kind of communities. So we've got recently in the last 2 years into kind of managing the community and having dedicated community managers in there, talking to them, and we've got big Discord platforms with players in talking about the game and giving them a voice and a way to kind of interact with each other and making sure that's a safe space. There's other businesses like Jagex, where I worked at in Cambridge, for a few years before this job, and they're really on the front foot in terms of like mental health within their organisation, but also within the within their game communities, because they've been running this live game RuneScape for 20 years. This is their 20th anniversary of it today. So they've created this massive platform of people that are interacting with each other inside this role-playing game, kind of fantasy-based. So I think what they've done is, they recognise that their community managers, on platforms like Twitch, had groups and of players following them, streaming the game, and they were able to get in amongst some of those those kind of like community leaders within the gaming community itself, and demonstrate with them ways that they could manage people that were coming on and playing the game, and waving a flag to say, I'm not doing well. Like how do we handle that as community teams when someone says that they're feeling suicidal in a chat room that's attached to a game? What's the best way of like handling that? So Mind are a charity that work closely with different game development teams and are trying to give them mental health sort of first aid training so they can handle some of these situations. When I worked at Jagex, we had like a mental health champions sort of group of people that were interested in this, and we would have all these different programs and things. So there's definitely a lot of progressive processes and thought going on around mental health for both studios and teams as well as the players. But it does seem like I see a lot more going on in there than in other sort of tech businesses, certainly.
You're on mute, Mel. Oh, dog's barking. Okay, so Mago is barking at Melissa, so that's our sign language. But let's get into for the the last kind of 10 minutes about how COVID and the lockdowns, and I looked at your video on your site, and I love driving games, and I'm imagining like getting one of those seats and the steering wheel and everything, kind of setting up a little spot just to kind of be immersed, because there's just not a lot to do out there. I can't go driving real cars. But how has COVID affected you guys over the last 10 months? And how's lockdown and what are the kind of the trends that you've seen with regards to people spending more time at home?
Certainly, we as a team, we're missing like being together in a physical space. I think more so like the wins and the kind of successes. Like the games business has always been keen to throw parties and celebrate things, and that's what's missing a little bit, is the whole kind of social fabric of it. There's an event called GDC in San Francisco that we all kind of pile out to. 40,000 game developers and people involved in publishing kind of go out to San Francisco, normally in sometime in March. And we missed it last year. And my friends that I normally meet up with there, we put this WhatsApp group together that's called like No GDC, and we were gonna use that group to make our own kind of like get together in London, in the middle of the year. And we still haven't been able to have that get together, that same group. We've still got that WhatsApp group running like a year later, and it looks like we're going to miss GDC again. So there's some sadness there that we're not connecting enough. And I think we are a little bit worn from the social Zoom things, and people trying to do parties on Zoom. It's admirable, but it's lame if you think compared to the real thing. you know, being in a physical place with people. We are physical beings, aren't we, humans? You know, we're tactile, we kind of touch the world, and we want to kind of show, you know, love to each other and sort of like put a hand on people sometimes, and it's tough not being able to do that. So yeah, the Hutchies are missing that. You know, we're missing our Friday nights. 5 o'clock, we used to have like beer o'clock, and the studio would just shut down, and everyone would kind of go into the kitchen space, and we would all just have a drink and a chat together, and it was just lovely time. So we missed that a lot. We were always working from home anyway, 2 days a week. So since Hutch was founded in 2011, we always had like Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the studio in Shoreditch, and then Tuesday and Thursday at home. So we were kind of pretty geared up to being able to run the business, you know, remotely. So middle of March last year, we just flipped to 5 days at home. Yeah, but it's been tough, really, just trying to, you know, that we have this weekly briefing on a Friday at 5 o'clock now instead of the beer o'clock. And the weekly briefing is a chance for all of the staff to ask anonymously any question that they've got for the leadership, and it's completely open. So if they want to ask the CEO, you know, what colour socks he's wearing, you know, he can jump on and share that. If they want to ask about when we're going to open the studio again, and like what the company can do to help them as individuals, like isolated at home, then we can talk about that and we can answer that question. So that's been, I think, a really useful place for, you know, people to talk and, you know, share concerns. And there is always a question every week since the middle of since March last year about when are we going back? You know, what's it going to be like? Yeah. Some organisations have switched to being 100% remote and saying, you know, we're never going to go back into our office. We're not ready to make that commitment just yet. We're still thinking that through, because there's an element of culture, you know, within Hutch that we think is strong because of these friendships that have been built by, you know, people, you know, being in a physical space together. So we're kind of hanging on to that a little bit. We don't want to go 100% remote. I think it would be kind of strange. So we've got this lovely site. We've got this beautiful office in Shoreditch, which you'll probably see on that video on the website. You know, it's a cool place to be. It's a great area. I love going there, especially on a Friday. And I'm looking forward to getting back into it. At the moment, the timeline, we're thinking about maybe, you know, June, we start to sort of ease back in small numbers. But yeah, can't wait.
I want a tour.
Come by. Yeah, I'd love to have you there. Come on, about 5 o'clock on a Friday, you'd like it the most.
Well, that's no good for me.
Hey, look, we've got non-alcoholic drinks, you know. I can
I'm good with lime and soda, buddy. I'm good with lime and soda.
There's plenty of people there that don't drink.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I know my partner's oldest. He's the gamer, and I think that if I could get him on a tour of your place, then I'm going to get some big brownie points. So
yeah, bring him in.
There you go.
Mel, do you have another question at all?
I was just, you know, curious about the creative process. I don't know if we have even time for that, but I wonder if you can just talk about, like, it. I think a lot of people don't see it as an art form. Maybe that's an assumption. I'm not sure where that's coming from, but there is this creativity. It is art. So I'm just wondering if you can maybe highlight some of the creative process around what the end result, what we play with, like with beginning, middle, and end, almost, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the artistic part of games is, you know, is the part that I'm normally most interested in. I'm a marketeer, but I think from where I've come from in games into marketing, the creativity is always the thing that I'm most interested in. You know, I'm interested in how games, you know, unlock these emotions within people, and then I'm interested in how we portray that. So, you know, the type of video assets and big pieces, you know, big banners and things that we create that showed off that kind of artistic aspect of the games. But you know, game developers, they play a lot of games, they know a lot about games, and they often think about areas that are new. You know, that's mainly their thing. It's like, why has this never been done? Or why is this game that I used to play on this ancient, Atari Jaguar console or something from the 90s? Why has no one ever tried to make that game, in the modern era? So there's normally these sort of foundational questions that they ask, creatively. At every studio that I know of, they carve out time. Like we have this one day every fortnight where game developers can work on any project that they want, their own personal project time. And that's where a lot of ideas are developed. We also have game jams where we'll kind of shut everything, we won't shut it down, but we'll stop our jobs, we'll let the games kind of tick along, but then we'll spend 3 days in different groups, on our own ideas and forming teams and coming up with different game concepts. And Hutch is unique in terms of we try to make something very simple to start with and test it very early. So we try and get it out, into the wild in certain countries, in very low numbers, just a little mechanic to see if it works. Because now you can really record, what they call retention. So, if people are still playing it at the end of day one and they want to play it on day two, that's a big win. You're looking at those percentages. And then you're looking at it right up to 30 days and even 365 days later. So there's instruments now where developers can test very early whether their idea, their mechanic, their creative approach is landing correctly with players, which is an amazing new opportunity really for developers to sort of sense check whether their ideas are good. In the old days, it used to be developers were kind of a bit isolated, I think, just making the games they wanted to play themselves and just hoping that that would land with a sizable group of members of the public. But nowadays, you don't have to have those sleepless nights, after spending $20 million and you're the night before a launch, the development team, none of them sleep. So, but now I think you can iteratively build something and add creativity to it and amend aspects of it, and slowly, it's live really from that first test, and it might even be 4 weeks in. So you might have only spent a very small amount of money, invested a very small amount of effort, but you're able to test whether something is appealing. So that's it really. Creative process around trying to do something unique and different and offer something that players maybe haven't seen before, and then just getting it into test as quickly as possible.
I have one final one for you guys. I was just going back to kind of this thing about the youth being involved with the game modes that there are available today, to say my generation, where the last time I stopped playing games around the PS2, and I was playing FIFA and Medal of Honor, I was playing these kind of games all on console, and then I stopped playing. So now I've got this huge gap where, I know people, because I'm going to be 50 in a couple of weeks. I am older than you. And there's this thing of like, we have all these kids doing this stuff, and there's this generational gap where, old school kind of gaming is, if you stopped like me 10 or 15 years ago, you've missed out on this evolution of mobile and immersive games. What kind of tips would you give a guy like me? And what kind of games would you say to start looking at, and to kind of get back into it softly, gently, just so that, again, so that we can communicate, so that when we can say to somebody younger, hey, have you spent maybe too much time on Fortnite? You can kind of speak that language and you can maybe understand. So what tips would you give a 50-year-old guy who's, wanting to kind of learn the language a little bit, learn more about the gaming industry and what's cool and what's not? All the anagrams that I just don't know. What tips would you give me?
I'd say don't be scared, Nick. Don't be scared, man. There's loads of people that are like you. Yeah. You're not alone. And games are for everybody. There's like everyone can interact in a game at different levels. Mobile has opened it up even more broadly. There's lots of little puzzle things that you can do on a mobile that make you a gamer, and a lot of people that play those games, they don't even think they're gamers, but they are, and it's become a language, and you shouldn't feel isolated from that. I'm sure the games that you were playing then are still going now. They'll still be running those games in some form or another. And the good thing about, you could still go and play FIFA, you'd still be able to play it at a level, you'd still, the game would find you a competitor that's at the same level as you. That's called matchmaking. And the best games, they match make you very gently into the game. You know, there's a learning curve, and they'll make sure that you're playing against an almost 50 but looks 30, you know, lapped FIFA player. So that
what game should from Hutch should I download after I get off this phone call with you?
Do you love cars?
Yeah, you know I do.
Do you love like everything about them though? I mean, like, are you?
I'm a huge Grand Prix fan, huge Grand Prix. So.
Okay, so we've got a game called Formula One Manager.
Oh wow.
Which is, you know, the hardest thing on a phone is like we realised that it's not the perfect kind of instrument to try and drive a car. So we learned that quite early, and we started making games that were more strategic. So we've made a game called Top Drives, which is about collecting cars, and it's like Top Trumps. So they're kind of cars on cards that you sort of race against each other in terms of their performance metrics. So that's a good one. Yeah, F1 Manager is similar. You sort of manage a 2-car Formula One team, and you can adjust, like in a race, how quick they go, you know, the type of tires that they should use, different sort of dynamics as a team principle, really. So if you fancy yourself as a bit of kind of lightweight.
Ron Dennis, yeah.
Yeah. So there's games for every kind of like niche now, so you shouldn't feel excluded or alone. Jump in.
Okay. I will. I'm going to. I'm starting to download and play right now. Guy, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it, brother. And yeah, I hope to see you soon, face to face for a coffee and a beer.
Come on in. Be great to see you. Nice to meet you, Melissa.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
See you soon.
Okay, and thanks everybody at the What's On at Alvin Castle Facebook page. Don't forget to join us at Thursday at 11 a.m. for our week 3 of Boundaries. That's going to be led by Melissa. So thanks. We'll see you then. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.